On an isolated rock in the sea, a former soldier sought solitude, but the dog he inherited, Scout, knew better. During a cold rain, the dog began to scratch frantically at the solid stone hearth. The soldier dismissed it, but the dog's desperation hinted at a secret his grandfather had hidden in the stone itself. What could an animal sense that a trained soldier could not see? The answer would change everything. Please consider supporting us by subscribing to the channel. The air in the office of Sterling and Associates was thick with the scent of old paper, lemon polish, and money so old it had forgotten its own value. It was a stagnant, suffocating air that clung to the dark mahogany panels and the stiff leather chairs. And for Liam, it was a cage. He sat perfectly still, his back straight, a habit beaten into him by years of service. To the casual observer, he looked calm, a man simply waiting. But inside, every nerve was firing. He catalogued the room's exits, the weight of the crystal decanter on the lawyer's desk, the slight tremor in his cousin's expensive Italian shoe. His body was a coiled spring in a world made of glass. Liam was a man carved from the lean, hard parts of the world. In his early 30s, his tall frame was more sinew than bulk, a quiet strength evident in his posture. His short brown hair was already showing distinguished threads of silver at the temples, and his rugged face, though etched with lines of hardship, held a fundamental kindness in the set of his jaw. His eyes, a startlingly clear shade of blue, held a deep and profound weariness. Dressed in a simple gray t-shirt under a faded blue and beige plaid shirt, worn jeans, and sturdy work boots, he was a former Navy SEAL, a man trained to be a ghost in the most dangerous places on earth, yet he had never felt more out of place than he did in this opulent tomb. Across the desk sat his cousin Evan. Younger by 5 years, Evan was the physical opposite of Liam. Where Liam was structure, Evan was soft. His suit was expertly tailored, but seemed a size too small for his fleshy frame, and his face, usually set in a look of smug satisfaction, was now a mask of impatient greed. He tapped his fingers on the polished wood, the sound like tiny, irritating hammers against Liam's frayed senses. Presiding over the uncomfortable silence was Mr. Sterling, a lawyer whose face seemed carved from old parchment, all dry lines and thin, bloodless lips. He adjusted his spectacles and cleared his throat, the sound rustling like dead leaves. "Now," he began, his voice as dry as his appearance, "we come to the final bequests of my client, the late Mr. Julian Croft." Julian Croft, his grandfather, a man Liam remembered only in faded, sun-drenched fragments. The scent of salt and engine oil, a calloused hand on his shoulder, a gruff voice that sounded like rocks tumbling in the surf. They had been estranged for nearly 15 years, ever since Liam had enlisted against his family's wishes. Mr. Sterling droned on, listing assets, stocks, and properties. A portfolio of significant value went to Evan. A summer home in the Hamptons went to Evan. The entirety of the Croft Shipping Company shares went to Evan. With each bequest, Evan's smirk grew wider, and he shot a pitying glance at Liam, the poor, lost soldier who had traded a fortune for a uniform. And finally, Mr. Sterling paused, peering over his glasses at Liam, a flicker of something unreadable in his old eyes. "For my grandson, Liam Croft." Evan let out a soft, condescending chuckle. The lawyer ignored him. "To Liam, I leave my home at Seawolf Ledge, off the coast of Maine, and everything upon it. I also entrust to his care my loyal companion, Scout." He paused, letting the words settle before reading the codicil, the part that would echo in Liam's mind for days to come. "This bequest is made with a specific understanding. Seawolf Ledge is given to Liam because he is the only one in this family who understands the value of a silent watch." Silence. The hum of the city seemed to fade. A silent watch. The word struck Liam with the force of a physical blow. It was a term from his world, a language of lonely nights spent staring into the oppressive dark, of a duty performed without praise or recognition. How could his grandfather, the man he barely knew, have understood? Evan broke the stillness with a loud, incredulous laugh. Sea-Wolf Ledge? That worthless piece of rock? And a dog? He shook his head, his face a caricature of disbelief and scorn. The old man really lost his mind at the end. Unless, he added, his eyes narrowing with a new kind of avarice, he buried treasure out there. You'd better start digging, cousin. It's all you're going to get. Liam didn't respond. He felt nothing from the insult, nothing from the loss of the fortune. He felt only the profound, stunning impact of that single phrase, a silent watch. For the first time in years, he felt seen. After Evan had swaggered out, leaving the scent of expensive cologne in his wake, Mr. Sterling leaned forward. Your cousin misunderstands your grandfather's intent, he said quietly. Julian was a unique man. He wasn't sentimental, but he was deliberate. The lawyer explained the arrangements. There was a small trust, managed by his office, set aside specifically for the upkeep of the property. It was a modest sum, just enough for basic supplies and fuel, enough for a man to live simply. Your grandfather also made arrangements for the dog, Mr. Sterling continued. He pushed a folder across the desk. He prepaid a local fisherman, a man named Jed, to make a trip out to the ledge every 2 days with food and fresh water after his passing. He wanted to ensure Scout was cared for until you arrived. Liam opened the folder. Inside was a deed, a hand-drawn map of the coastline marking Sea-Wolf Ledge and the fisherman's contact information. What kind of dog is he? Liam asked, his voice raspy from disuse. A German shepherd, the lawyer replied. About 5 years old, a large one, I'm told. All gray and white, like seafoam on a winter sea. A serious, stoic animal, from what your grandfather described. A serious dog for a serious place. Liam stared at the map. A dot in the vast blue of the Atlantic. An inheritance not of wealth, but of isolation. A crumbling house. A dog named Scout. And a legacy contained in 6 resonant words. To Evan, it was a joke. A pile of worthless rock. But to Liam, a man drowning in the noise of a world he no longer fit into, it sounded like the only thing that could ever save him. It sounded like a quiet place to finally stand down from his watch. The long drive north to Maine was a slow exorcism of the city's stale air. For 2 days, Liam drove, his old pickup truck eating up the miles of asphalt that separated the mahogany-paneled office from the rugged coastline of his inheritance. With each passing town, the buildings grew smaller, the trees taller, and the sky wider. The noise in his head, the constant, buzzing hypervigilance that had been his companion since his last tour, began to recede, replaced by the steady hum of the engine and the whisper of the wind. He arrived in the small fishing town of Port Clyde as a damp, gray dusk was settling over the harbor. The air smelled sharply of salt, pine, and low tide. It was a clean, honest smell that seemed to scour his lungs. Following Mr. Sterling's directions, he found a weathered pier where a man was mending a net under the yellow glow of a single bare bulb. This was Jed. He was a man who seemed to have been carved from the same driftwood that littered the shore. His face, a roadmap of deep lines etched by sun and sea. He wore a thick, oil-stained wool sweater, and his hands, though gnarled with age, moved with a practiced, efficient grace. He looked up as Liam approached, his pale blue eyes assessing, missing nothing. "You must be the Croft boy," Jed said, his voice a low rumble like stones shifting on the seabed. There was no warmth in it, but no hostility either. It was a simple statement of fact. "Liam," he corrected gently, extending a hand. "And you must be Jed." Jed wiped his hand on his trousers before taking Liam's, his grip surprisingly strong. "Aye, your grandfather was a good man. Kept to himself, but he was fair." He nodded towards the end of the pier. "Your ride's waiting, and your company." Tied to a cleat was a small, sturdy motorboat. Its blue paint was chipped and faded, its hull scarred from countless encounters with docks and rocks, but it sat low and steady in the water. It was a workboat, built for purpose, not for show. And sitting in the stern, as still and silent as a statue, was a dog. Liam's breath caught. The lawyer's description hadn't done him justice. Scout was magnificent. A large, 5-year-old German shepherd. His thick coat was a stunning blend of silver gray and stark white, the colors of a winter storm over a churning sea. His ears were erect, his posture alert, and his intelligent, amber-colored eyes were fixed on Liam. There was no barking, no wagging tail, just a quiet, intense scrutiny. He was, as Julian Croft had described, a serious dog for a serious place. Liam moved slowly, approaching the boat. He stopped a few feet away and crouched down, making himself smaller. "Hey, Scout," he said, his voice soft. "I'm Liam." The dog's head tilted slightly. He rose from his seated position and walked to the edge of the boat, his paws silent on the fiberglass. He leaned forward, sniffing the air, his gaze never leaving Liam's. In that moment, Liam saw not just an animal, but a fellow sentinel. He saw the same watchfulness, the same quiet understanding of solitude that he felt in his own bones. It was an instant, profound connection, a silent acknowledgement that passed between two beings accustomed to the lonely watch. "He's been waiting," Jed said from behind him. "Since Julian passed, he just sits, watches the sea, like he knew you were coming." Liam reached out a hand, palm up. After a moment's hesitation, Scout leaned forward and gently touched his wet nose to Liam's fingers. A current seemed to pass between them, a transfer of trust. Then, for the first time, the dog's tail gave a single, slow thump against the side of the boat. It was enough. Jed helped him load his supplies, a few boxes of rations, tools, and a duffel bag with his meager belongings. He showed Liam the basics of the boat's engine, a simple, reliable diesel that coughed to life with a puff of black smoke. "She's not pretty, but she'll get you there and back," Jed grunted. "Your grandfather left her for you, paid in full." As Liam untied the ropes, Jed put a hand on his shoulder. "The ledge is a hard place. It asks a lot and gives little back. But your grandfather saw something out there. Hope you find it." With a final nod, Liam pushed off. The small boat chugged out of the harbor, leaving the warm lights of the town behind. Scout stood at the bow, his paws planted firmly, his silhouette a noble shape against the darkening sky. He was perfectly at home on the moving water, a true creature of this new saltwater kingdom. After 20 minutes, it appeared. Sea Wolf Ledge. It was a jagged tooth of dark granite rising from the slate-gray water, more intimidating and desolate than he had imagined. Perched precariously on its highest point was a small, dark shape, a wooden house that looked like it was one strong gust of wind away from being reclaimed by the sea. Evan's mocking laugh echoed in his memory, a worthless piece of rock. Navigating carefully, Liam found the small, sheltered cove his grandfather had marked on the map. He cut the engine and let the boat drift the last few feet until its hull scraped against a crude stone landing. The silence that descended was absolute, broken only by the crash of waves against the far side of the rock and the cry of a distant gull. This was isolation in its purest form. Scout leaped effortlessly from the boat to the rock, then turned, waiting patiently. Liam followed, his boots finding purchase on the slick stone. He secured the boat and grabbed a bag, starting the steep climb to the house. The wind whipped at his clothes, cold and sharp with the taste of salt. The house was even worse, up close. The wood was bleached gray and splintered. The windows were clouded with salt spray, and one of the shutters hung from a single hinge, banging a mournful rhythm in the wind. He pushed the door open. It groaned in protest. The inside was sparse, filled with the ghosts of old furniture and the smell of damp disuse and the ever-present sea. A wave of despair, cold and heavy, washed over him. What was he doing here? This wasn't a refuge, it was a tomb. But then, a warm, solid pressure pressed against his leg. He looked down. Scout was standing beside him, leaning against him, his amber eyes looking up with an expression of unwavering loyalty. The dog's simple, grounding presence cut through the despair. This wasn't just a house. It was a shelter. It wasn't a tomb. It was a post. And he wasn't alone. He had company. Liam took a deep breath, the salt air filling his lungs. He dropped his bag on the floor, the sound echoing in the empty space. "Okay, Scout," he said, a sense of purpose beginning to kindle within him. "Let's get to work." The days on Seawolf Ledge bled into weeks, each one governed not by a clock or a calendar, but by the great, slow breathing of the ocean. Time was measured in the rise and fall of the tide, the shifting of the sun across the sky, and the growing ache in Liam's muscles. He and Scout fell into a rhythm, a Spartan routine that was both demanding and deeply restorative. Mornings began before sunrise, with Scout nudging a cold, wet nose into Liam's hand. They would start the day by walking the perimeter of their granite kingdom, a silent inspection of their post. Liam would check the mooring on the boat, ensuring the ropes were secure, while Scout stood watch from the highest point of the rock, his ears swiveling to catch every sound carried on the wind. The house, their battered fortress, demanded constant attention. Liam, using the tools his grandfather had left behind, became a student of salvage and repair. He learned the unique groan each floorboard made, the way the wind whistled through a specific crack in the wall. He replaced rotten planks on the small porch, rehung the crooked shutter, and painstakingly scraped layers of salt crust from the window panes until slivers of clear daylight could finally pierce the gloom. Each swing of the hammer, each turn of the screwdriver, was a focused, physical act that left no room for the ghosts of the past. The loud, sharp sounds that would have sent him spiraling in the city were different here. They were sounds of creation, of mending, and when he flinched, Scout would be there, a solid, reassuring presence at his side, grounding him in the here and now. His panic attacks, once crippling ambushes that left him breathless and shaking, began to lose their power. They still came, but they were shadows of their former selves, whispers of fear instead of roars. In the vast, open emptiness of the sea and sky, the triggers of his trauma had nothing to echo against. The quiet work of survival was a powerful therapy, and the stillness of the ledge began to seep into his soul. Their bond, Liam's and Scout's, deepened beyond that of a man and his dog. It became a partnership forged in shared solitude. They were two soldiers holding a lonely outpost, communicating in a language that needed no words. When Liam's frustration mounted over a stubborn nail or a warped piece of wood, Scout would rest his heavy head on his knee. When the familiar ache of loneliness settled on Liam's shoulders as he watched the distant lights on the mainland appear at dusk, Scout would let out a low, soft whine and push a worn tennis ball he had found under the porch into his hand. Liam learned to read the dog as well as he read the weather. A low growl directed at the waves meant the tide was turning aggressively. A persistent, sniffing patrol of the house's foundation meant a storm was rolling in. He trusted Scout's instincts implicitly, the same way he had once trusted the man watching his six in a dark alley halfway across the world. To supplement his packaged rations, Liam took up fishing. He found his grandfather's old rods and tackle box in a sea chest. He would cast his line off the western rocks, Scout sitting patiently beside him for hours, a statue of gray and white against the dark stone. The repetitive motion was meditative, and the thrill of a tug on the line was a simple, uncomplicated joy. He would share his catch with Scout, cooking the fish over a small fire pit he built in the lee of a rock outcropping. They would eat together, watching the stars emerge in a brilliant, unpolluted canopy, the only sounds the crackle of the fire and the steady wash of the surf. One afternoon, while repairing a small, water-damaged writing desk in the corner of the main room, he found a drawer that was stuck fast. After carefully working it loose, he discovered it was full not of papers, but of a collection of leather-bound journals. They were his grandfather's ET8. He sat on the floor, Scout resting his head on his lap, and opened the first one. The handwriting was precise, the script of an engineer. But these were not personal diaries. They were logs, filled with meticulous observations. For years, Julian Croft had chronicled the life of this rock. There were detailed charts of tidal patterns, notes on the speed and temperature of the ocean currents that swirled around the ledge, and sketches of seabird migrations. But it was the last section of each journal that captivated him. His grandfather had written about what he called the songs of the ocean. He described the low-frequency hums that vibrated through the granite on calm nights, the distinct acoustic signatures of passing ships miles away, and the deep, resonant groans the seabed would make during a storm. Julian hadn't just been living on this rock. He had been listening to it, studying its voice, treating the entire ledge as a massive, organic listening device. Liam ran a hand over the intricate diagrams and pages of dense notations, a profound sense of awe settling over him. He was beginning to understand that his inheritance wasn't just a rock and a dog. It was a mystery. The discovery of the journals changed the texture of Liam's days. The physical labor of repairing the house continued, but now his evenings were spent in study, poring over his grandfather's meticulous notes by the light of a kerosene lamp. The rhythmic crash of the waves outside was no longer just background noise. It was the symphony that Julian Croft had spent years trying to decode. Liam felt a growing connection to the grandfather he barely knew, a kinship of shared purpose that spanned across time. He was no longer just an inheritor. He was becoming an archivist. A week after finding the journals, a cold, persistent rain began to fall, shrouding the ledge in a thick, gray mist that blurred the line between sea and sky. It was the kind of weather that seeped into the bones, forcing them indoors. Liam lit a fire in the stone hearth, the flames a welcome burst of orange and warmth against the gloom. He settled into an old armchair with one of the journals, while Scout lay sprawled on the worn rug before the fire, his head resting on his paws. For an hour, the only sounds were the crackle of the fire, the drumming of the rain on the roof, and the turning of pages. Then Scout stirred. He lifted his head, his ears twitching, and let out a low, almost inaudible whine. He rose and padded over to the hearth, sniffing intently at the large, flat slab of granite that formed its base, just to the left of the firebox. Liam watched him over the top of the journal. "What is it, boy? A mouse?" Scout ignored him. His sniffing became more frantic. He lowered his head and whined again, a note of quiet urgency in the sound. Then he did something he had never done inside the house before. He lifted a paw and scratched at the stone. The sound of his claws scraping against the rock was sharp and jarring in the quiet room. "Hey, easy," Liam said, putting the journal down. "You'll wear your claws down to nothing." Scout looked back at him, his amber eyes intense, and then deliberately turned and scratched the stone again, harder this time. A low, guttural bark escaped his throat, not a sound of aggression, but of deep frustration, as if he were trying to tell Liam something vital and lacked the words to do so. Liam stood up and walked over, crouching beside the dog. He ran a hand over the stone. It was cold, solid, and seemed no different from any other part of the hearth. "There's nothing here, Scout." But Scout was relentless. He paced back and forth in front of the stone, whining and nudging Liam's hand with his nose, pushing him toward the hearth. Liam felt a flicker of annoyance, but it was quickly replaced by something else. Trust. He remembered the nights in Afghanistan, when the team's combat tracker dog would freeze, refusing to move, alerting them to a hidden explosive device that would have killed them all. He had learned then, in the most brutal of classrooms, that the instincts of a highly trained animal were a language you ignored at your peril. And everything about Scout, from his stoic demeanor to his unwavering focus, screamed that he was more than just a pet. All right, I get it," Liam conceded, patting the dog's broad head. "You win." He examined the stone slab more closely. It was massive, set flush with the floorboards. But as he ran his fingers along the seam where it met the wooden floor, he felt it, a slight give, a minuscule shift that was imperceptible to the eye. He pressed down on the edge with all his weight, and he heard a faint, grating sound. His heart began to beat a little faster. He went to the sea chest where he stored his tools and pulled out a long, heavy-duty crowbar. Wedging the flattened tip into the tiny gap, he put his shoulder into it and heaved. For a moment, Nothing happened. Then, with a deep groan of protest, the heavy stone slab tilted upwards. Beneath it was not dirt or foundation, but a dark, hollow space. The air that rose from it was cool and dry, with a faint metallic scent. Lining the cavity completely was a dull gray metal, lead, a lead-lined box built right into the foundation of the house, protected by a stone that must have weighed 300 pounds. Scout stood beside him, panting softly, his tail giving a few slow, satisfied thumps against the floor. Reaching inside, Liam's fingers brushed against two objects. The first was a book, similar to the other journals but wrapped in oilcloth, perfectly preserved. The second was a heavy object made of brass. He lifted it out. It wasn't a key in any traditional sense. It was a solid piece of machined brass, with a T-shaped handle and a cylindrical end that was cut with a series of complex, interlocking notches and grooves. It looked more like a specialized component for a piece of machinery than something used to open a door. He set the strange key aside and unwrapped the journal. He opened it to the first page. The same precise engineering script greeted him, but this time it was different. My name is Julian Croft. In the year 1973, I was honorably discharged from the United States Navy, where I served as a senior acoustic engineer in the Sound Surveillance System project. Liam read the words again, and then a third time. An acoustic engineer, the Navy. The journals filled with notes on the songs of the ocean suddenly snapped into sharp focus. This was never a fisherman's hobby. This was the life's work of a specialist, a man who had been professionally trained to listen to the secrets of the deep. He slowly looked up from the page, his gaze falling on the strange brass key glinting in the firelight. The mystery of Seawolf Ledge, he realized, was only just beginning. The fire in the hearth had burned down to glowing embers, but Liam felt no chill. The words on the page in front of him were a fire of their own, burning away decades of mystery. He sat on the floor, the oilcloth-wrapped journal open in his lap, Scout, a warm, heavy presence, leaning against his side. The strange brass key lay on the stone hearth, its intricate design catching the faint, pulsing light from the coals. Sound Surveillance System. The official project name was Clinical Cold, but in Julian Croft's private writings, the project came alive. This journal was different from the others. It was not a log of observations. It was a confession, a manifesto, and a blueprint for a secret world. With a growing sense of disbelief, Liam read about the genesis of Seawolf Ledge. His grandfather, a brilliant but cantankerous engineer, had discovered that this specific, worthless piece of rock was a geological anomaly. The unique density and composition of the granite deep within the ledge acted as a natural acoustic amplifier, a massive, passive lens that could focus the faintest sounds from the deep ocean channel a dozen miles offshore. It was, he wrote, a gift from the earth, a natural listening post more sensitive than any man-made array of the time. The journal detailed the secret construction, a project Julian had undertaken after his discharge, funded by his own savings and a quiet patent he had sold. He described, with an engineer's pride, how he had spent 5 years hollowing out a chamber deep within the stone, a feat of solitary, back-breaking labor. Then came the part that made Liam sit up straighter, the power source. Julian had been obsessed with self-sufficiency, with creating something that could not be shut down by cutting a power line from the mainland. He had designed and built a revolutionary tidal generator. Using a series of concealed underwater turbines in a narrow channel on the north side of the ledge, the system harnessed the immense, relentless power of the anointing and ebbing tides. It was a self-contained, self-sustaining power source that would, in his words, run as long as the moon pulls the sea. He had even installed a complex series of batteries and regulators to ensure a steady supply, a design so elegant and far-sighted it took Liam's breath away. But as the journal progressed, the tone of pride was replaced by a deep, simmering bitterness. Julian wrote of his final years in the Navy, of presenting his research on the unique properties of places like Seawolf Ledge. He had envisioned a network of small defensive listening posts, an invisible shield to protect the coast. But his superiors, the men he contemptuously referred to only as the vultures, saw something else. They saw a tool for tracking and targeting, a way to turn his shield into a sword. "They want to hunt with it," Julian wrote, his script growing sharp and angry. "I gave them the means to hear a whisper, a league away, and they only want to use it to aim a cannon. They speak of deterrence, but their eyes gleam with the promise of aggression. They cannot see the beauty in listening. They only see the utility in killing." Disgusted, he had taken an early discharge, burying his research and dedicating his life to building his creation in secret, on his own terms. He had built his station not for a government or a military, but for the principle of the silent watch itself. He wanted to listen, to understand, to protect, not to attack. He was a guardian, not a hunter. As Liam read the words, the phrase from the will echoed in his mind with thunderous clarity. He finally understood. This was the silent watch his grandfather had meant, a lifelong solitary vigil against the very forces they had both once served. Liam gently closed the journal, his mind reeling. The quiet, eccentric old man from his childhood had been a visionary, a genius living in self-imposed exile, guarding a secret that could change the world. He looked at Scout, who gazed back at him with his steady, knowing eyes. "He trained you for this, didn't he?" Liam whispered. "He trained you to find someone who would understand." He picked up the journal again, turning to the final few pages. The narrative prose stopped abruptly. It was replaced by something starkly familiar, a language he understood as well as English. The pages were filled with lines of numbers, letters, and naval abbreviations. It was a cipher, a standard grid-based naval code he had learned in training. His mind, long accustomed to the slow rhythm of the tides, sharpened instantly, slipping back into the disciplined focus of his former life. He found a pencil and a spare sheet of paper and began the methodical work of decryption. It was a slow process, a conversation with a ghost conducted in the arcane language of the military. The decoded message was not a simple set of instructions. It was a series of riddles steeped in naval lore. Where the sea breathes out and the stone sighs. The spring tide, Liam realized. The lowest tide of the month, when the maximum amount of rock was exposed. At the hour of the dog watch, between 1600 and 2000 hours, late afternoon. Follow the kraken's arms to the heart of the trident. He remembered from the earlier journals his grandfather's fanciful name for a unique rock formation on the far side of the ledge, a series of long, dark kelp beds that looked like tentacles stretching from a central, three-pronged rock. The final line of the code was a simple drawing, the profile of the strange brass key, with an arrow indicating a twisting motion. Liam leaned back, the decoded message laid out before him. It was a treasure map, but the treasure wasn't gold. It was a hidden door, a gateway into his grandfather's secret world. He looked at the heavy brass key, its purpose now terrifyingly clear. Then, he looked out the window at the gray, churning sea. The tide was turning. Waiting became a new kind of watch. With the decoded message from his grandfather's journal tucked safely away, Liam's days were now ruled by a single purpose. He consulted Julian's meticulous tide charts, cross-referencing them with the small almanac he had brought with him. He watched the moon wax and wane, a sliver of silver growing into a full, brilliant disk that cast a shimmering path across the water. The spring tide was 3 days away. During that time, an electric tension settled over the ledge. It was a shared anticipation, a silent understanding that pulsed between man and dog. Scout seemed to sense the shift. He was even more attentive than usual, his amber eyes often fixed on Liam, his head cocked, as if waiting for a command that had been encoded in his very being. They would make their daily patrols, but now their gazes lingered on the far side of the island, on the jagged formation of rocks that Julian had named the Trident. On the third day, the air was still, and the sea was a sheet of glass. The tide began to recede with an almost preternatural speed, pulling back farther than Liam had ever seen it go. It was as if the ocean itself was taking a deep, slow breath, exposing the ledge's hidden foundations. Rocks that had been perpetually submerged were now slick and dark in the afternoon sun, adorned with glistening green and brown seaweed. The world smelled of salt, brine, and ancient stone. It was time. The hour of the dog watch was upon them. "Ready, boy?" Liam asked, his voice low. Scout responded with a soft woof, his body tense with excitement. Liam slung a small, durable pack over his shoulder. Inside, he had placed a powerful flashlight, a length of sturdy rope, and a bottle of water. He slipped the heavy brass key into his jacket pocket, its weight a solid, tangible link to the past. He checked his sturdy work boots, then gave Scout a final, firm pat on the head. "All right, let's go see what he was hiding." They made their way down the treacherous path, from the house to the newly exposed shoreline. The footing was slick with sea moss, and the air was thick with the cries of gulls disturbed by the receding water. Scout moved with a confident four-footed grace, his paws finding purchase where Liam's boots sometimes slipped. He led the way, not with frantic pulling, but with a steady, purposeful trot, occasionally looking back to ensure Liam was following. They reached the formation Julian had called the Kraken's Arms. It was a series of long, thick beds of dark brown kelp, exposed by the low tide, that snaked their way from the deeper water toward the base of a tall, three-pronged cliff face, the Trident. The kelp was like a carpet of living tentacles, and they had to navigate through it, the thick, rubbery fronds clinging to their legs. Liam followed the instructions, tracing the path of the kelp to the base of the central prong of the cliff. It was a sheer wall of granite, slick with moisture and covered in a thick tapestry of seaweed and barnacles. It looked impenetrable, a solid, unyielding piece of the earth. There was no sign of a door, no hint of a seam, nothing to suggest it was anything other than what it appeared to be. For a moment, a sliver of doubt entered his mind. Had he misread the code? Was this all a wild fantasy? Then Scout acted. He pushed past Liam, his nose to the rock. He moved along the base of the cliff, sniffing, his tail held low and straight. He stopped at a spot that looked identical to every other section of the wall, a place completely draped in a thick curtain of dark green seaweed. He sniffed it once, twice, and then he looked back at Liam. He let out a single, sharp, commanding bark. It was not a sound of alarm or excitement. It was a sound of confirmation. Here. Liam's doubt vanished, replaced by a surge of adrenaline. He trusted the dog. He made his way to the spot and began pulling the heavy, wet curtains of seaweed aside. The rock beneath was dark and slimy to the touch. He ran his hands over the surface, feeling for any imperfection, any crack or seam. Nothing. "Show me," he murmured. Scout nudged a specific spot with his nose, right at waist height. Liam focused on that small area, wiping away the slime and sea moss, and then he saw it. It was not a keyhole, not a button, not a handle. It was a perfectly circular indentation, no bigger than a coin, with a complex, gear-like pattern cut into its center. It was so seamlessly integrated into the rock face that it was virtually invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. His heart pounded against his ribs. He took the heavy brass key from his pocket. The light was fading, but he could see that the intricate notches and grooves on the end of the key were a perfect match for the pattern in the rock. It was the work of a master craftsman, a piece of precision engineering hidden in plain sight. With a slightly trembling hand, he inserted the key into the slot. It slid in with a smooth, satisfying click, fitting so perfectly there was no play at all. He took a deep breath, gripped the T-shaped handle with both hands, and turned it clockwise, just as the drawing in the journal had indicated. For a second, nothing happened. Then, a low, deep grinding sound vibrated through the soles of his boots, a sound that seemed to come from the very heart of the stone. A thin, perfectly straight line appeared in the rock face, tracing the outline of a large, rectangular door. The sound grew louder, the groan of immense weight being moved by a powerful, hidden mechanism. Slowly, ponderously, the entire section of the cliff face began to recede into the darkness within, a multi-ton slab of solid granite sliding inward like the door of a bank vault. The opening revealed a dark, square tunnel leading into absolute blackness. A cool, dry, still air flowed out, carrying the faint scent of ozone and dormant machinery. Liam and Scout stood at the threshold, staring into the abyss. The mystery of Seawolf Ledge was no longer a riddle on a page. It was a dark, silent passageway, waiting to be explored. For a long moment, Liam and Scout stood frozen at the threshold, two figures silhouetted against the fading light of the outside world. The tunnel before them was a perfect square of absolute black, a wound in the ancient stone. The cool, dry air that flowed from it was sterile, a stark contrast to the salt and life of the sea behind them. Liam's SEAL training took over. Pushing aside the initial shock, he clicked on the powerful flashlight from his pack, its beam cutting a sharp white cone into the darkness. The tunnel was smooth-walled, lined with a material that didn't reflect the light, seeming to swallow it. It ran straight for about 50 feet before ending at a heavy, sealed metal door like one found on a naval vessel. "Stay close," he murmured to Scout, though the command was unnecessary. The dog was already pressed against his leg, not out of fear, but with a quiet, alert readiness. His ears were forward, his nose twitching as he processed the strange, new scents. They moved down the tunnel together, their footsteps the only sound in the profound silence. Liam kept the flashlight beam moving, methodically scanning the walls and ceiling. The construction was flawless, the work of a master. He reached the door and examined the locking mechanism, a large, circular wheel. He put his hands on it and turned. Decades of disuse had done nothing to impede its function. It spun smoothly, silently, and the heavy door swung inward with a soft hiss of equalizing pressure. Liam stepped through the doorway and stopped dead, his breath catching in his throat. He was standing on a raised metal catwalk overlooking a cavernous, circular chamber. The room was carved directly from the living granite of the ledge, but the space was filled with the quiet, imposing presence of advanced technology. Banks of servers with blinking standby lights lined one wall. A series of complex control panels and consoles formed a semicircle in the center of the room. Dominating the far wall was a massive, curved screen, currently dark and silent. The air was cool and circulated by a faint, almost inaudible hum. Everything was spotlessly clean, free of dust or corrosion, preserved in this hermetically sealed tomb. It was a time capsule from the Cold War, yet it felt futuristic. Scout let out a low, soft whine, his gaze sweeping the incredible sight before him. Liam descended the metal steps to the main floor, his boots clanging softly in the vast space. He approached the central console, running a hand over its cool, smooth surface. He pulled out the lead-lined journal and opened it to the pages following the cipher. There, his grandfather had laid out the startup sequence in the same precise, methodical script. It was a complex, multi-stage process designed to prevent accidental or unauthorized activation. First, engage primary power from the tidal regulators, the instructions began. He located a heavy, shielded panel on the wall. Inside was a series of large, insulated levers. Following the diagram in the journal, he engaged them one by one. A deep, resonant hum began to fill the chamber, a sound that seemed to vibrate up from the very bedrock. The standby lights on the server banks switched from amber to a steady, solid green. The station was waking up. For the next 10 minutes, he was no longer Liam Croft, the lost veteran. He was a SEAL operator, following a mission checklist with calm, focused precision. He moved from console to console, initiating diagnostic checks, bringing the cooling systems online, and verifying power flow to the main processors. Each step was a small victory, a connection to the brilliant mind that had designed this place. Scout shadowed his every move, a silent, gray and white ghost in the suddenly illuminated room. Finally, he arrived at the last step. A single, protected button on the main console, labeled Acoustic Array, Online. He took a breath, looked at Scout, and pressed it. The massive, curved screen flickered. Lines of diagnostic text scrolled rapidly across its surface in a green, phosphorescent script. A wireframe map of the local coastline appeared, then a series of concentric circles expanded from a point-marked Seawolf ledge. And then, it happened. The text and lines vanished, replaced by an explosion of light and color. The screen was no longer a screen. It was a window into a world of pure sound. The deep, silent black of the ocean was rendered as a living tapestry of noise. The steady, low-frequency drone of a distant cargo ship was a slow-moving river of deep purple. A pod of dolphins communicating a few miles away was a series of flashing, electric blue streaks. The biological noise of a shrimp bed was a constant, shimmering cloud of pale green static. Liam stared, utterly mesmerized. He was seeing the symphony his grandfather had written about. It was a world more vibrant, more complex, and more alive than he could have ever imagined. He could see the currents, feel the tectonic hum of the earth, and witness the secret conversations of the deep. It was beautiful and terrifying and overwhelmingly powerful. This was what Julian Croft had dedicated his life to. Not a weapon, but a new sense, a way to perceive the very heartbeat of the planet. As he stood there in awe, his eyes were drawn to a small brass plaque affixed to the console just below the main screen. It had been polished to a high shine. Engraved on it, in his grandfather's familiar script, was the final message, the guiding principle for this entire incredible creation. Use it to protect, not to profit. The watch is now yours. While Liam was discovering a hidden world beneath the waves, his cousin Evan was digging through a world of paper and numbers, and he was not pleased. Back in the city, surrounded by the comfort his inheritance had bought him, a persistent, gnawing irritation had taken root. The old man's will had been an insult, a public declaration that the soldier was somehow more worthy than the businessman. To Evan, it was unthinkable. Driven by a mix of wounded pride and pure greed, he had hired a team of forensic accountants to dissect every transaction Julian Croft had made in the last 30 years. He was looking for hidden accounts, undeclared assets, anything to prove the old man had cheated him. For weeks, the accountants found nothing. Then, they started looking at the expenses. The report landed on Evan's desk with a heavy thud. It was a thick binder detailing decades of astonishing expenditures. There were massive, recurring payments to specialized marine engineering firms, invoices for hundreds of tons of high-grade steel, lead, and copper wiring from industrial suppliers, contracts with deep-sea demolition and excavation crews. All of it, every single dollar, was funneled toward a single, worthless asset, Seawolf Ledge. Evan stared at the numbers, his mind racing. It wasn't a treasure chest of gold his grandfather had hidden. It was something he had built, something expensive, something valuable. His imagination, fueled by avarice, ran wild. A private research lab? A hidden vault? A revolutionary piece of technology? Whatever it was, it belonged to him, the true heir. The soldier could have his rock, but the prize hidden within it was another matter entirely. He made a few calls. The first was to secure transport. The second was to hire protection. He didn't know what he would find out on that ledge, but he wasn't going to let his quiet, traumatized cousin stand in his way. 2 days later, a sleek, powerful motor yacht cut through the gray Maine waters, its white hull a jarring intrusion against the rugged landscape. At the helm stood Evan, dressed in an expensive waterproof jacket that looked like it had never been exposed to so much as a drizzle. Beside him stood 2 men he had hired for the afternoon. One was short and wiry with a nervous energy. His name was Finn. The other was a mountain of a man, silent and brooding, called Rook. They were not sailors, they were muscle. their discomfort on the moving water obvious. As they rounded the final outcropping and Seawolf Ledge came into view, Evan let out a triumphant laugh. The dilapidated shack on top looked as pathetic as ever. "There it is," he announced. "The kingdom of the King of Nothing." Liam and Scout were outside, mending a fishing net near the house, when they heard it, a sound alien to their quiet world. The high-pitched whine of a powerful engine, growing closer. Scout was on his feet in an instant, a low, rumbling growl starting deep in his chest. Liam stood slowly, his eyes scanning the water. He saw the yacht, a bright white scar on the gray sea, heading directly for their cove. He felt no panic, just the cold, familiar calm of a threat assessment. 3 men, one he knew, 2 unknown quantities. They were deliberate, not lost tourists. He placed a hand on Scout's back, the thick fur tense beneath his palm. "Easy, boy," he murmured. "Stand your post." The yacht anchored clumsily in the cove, its polished chrome fittings glittering in the pale sun. Evan, Finn, and Rook boarded a small inflatable tender and motored to the stone landing. Evan leaped out, his expensive deck shoes slipping on the wet rock, and he nearly fell. "Liam!" he called out, his voice a jarring mix of false cheer and arrogance. "Cousin, fancy finding you here. I was in the neighborhood and thought I'd drop by." Liam didn't move from his spot near the house, forcing them to make the difficult climb up to him. Scout remained at his side, his growl a steady, menacing hum. As the 3 men approached, the dog shifted his position slightly, placing himself squarely between Liam and the newcomers. "That's a big dog," Finn said nervously, eyeing Scout's bared teeth. "He's friendly enough, if you give him a reason to be," Liam replied, his voice flat and even. His gaze never left Evan. "What do you want, Evan?" "Straight to business." "I like that," Evan said, trying to regain his composure. He waved a hand dismissively at the shack. "I've been looking through Granddad's finances. It seems he spent a fortune turning this pile of rocks into, well, that's what I'm here to find out. I'm here to claim my property." "You got your inheritance," Liam said. "This is mine." "The rock is yours," Evan sneered, his facade of friendliness dissolving. "Whatever technology, whatever vault, whatever he built here with the family's money, is mine. Now, you can show me where it is, or we can do this the hard way." He nodded at Rook, who took a menacing step forward. Liam didn't even glance at the big man. His focus remained on his cousin. He was the threat commander. "There's nothing here for you," he said. "You should get back on your boat and leave." Evan laughed, a shrill, unpleasant sound. "Oh, I don't think so. You see, I'm not just here for myself. I've been in contact with some very interested investors, a foreign consortium. They pay top dollar for unique American engineering, no questions asked. They're very eager to see what's for sale." The words hit Liam with the force of a physical blow. This wasn't just about greed anymore. Evan, in his blind, stupid avarice, was trying to sell a vital piece of national defense to an unknown foreign power. He was a vulture, just as his grandfather had written, but he was also a traitor. The temperature on the ledge seemed to drop. Liam's posture changed, the weary homesteader vanishing, replaced by the cold, hard lines of the SEAL operator. Scout sensed the shift instantly. His growl deepened, escalating into a sound that was no longer a warning, but a promise. The sky, which had been clear moments before, was beginning to darken in the west, a bruised, purple line appearing on the horizon. A storm was coming, in more ways than one. The shift in the atmosphere was instantaneous and absolute. The bruised line on the horizon had not been a distant threat. It was the leading edge of a furious assault. The wind, which had been a steady breeze, suddenly shrieked, tearing at their clothes with an invisible, violent hand. The sea, moments before a manageable swell, rose up in a series of colossal, green-black waves, their crests whipped into white fury. The first of these monster waves struck the base of Seawolf Ledge, and the entire granite tooth shuddered, a deep, resonant vibration that traveled up through the soles of their boots. Evan's sneer was wiped from his face, replaced by a slack-jawed look of alarm. The two hired men, Finn and Rook, exchanged panicked glances. They were city muscle, completely out of their element in this raw, untamable wilderness. Their sleek motor yacht, anchored in the cove, was now being tossed about like a child's toy, its bow plunging violently into the troughs between waves. "We have to go!" Finn yelled over the roar of the wind, his voice thin and reedy. "Go where?" Evan screamed back, his hair plastered to his forehead by the spray. "We'll be swamped before we even clear the cove." He was right. The storm had trapped them. Their only refuge on this desolate rock was the dilapidated wooden shack they had been trying to break into. Desperation turned Evan's greed into a feral sort of courage. "Get the door open," he ordered, pointing a trembling finger at Rook. Now, Rook, the silent mountain of a man, needed no further encouragement. He lowered his shoulder and charged the old wooden door. The frame splintered on the first impact, the sound lost in the howl of the wind. Liam and Scout were forced back into the small, single room. Another wave hit the ledge, harder this time, and a sheet of icy water cascaded over the roof, finding its way through a dozen cracks to rain down on them inside. Rook hit the door again, and it sagged on its hinges. It would not hold for a third strike. But just as the big man gathered himself for the final blow, Scout did something Liam had never heard before. The deep, threatening growl in his chest ceased. He lifted his head, and from his throat came a sound that was not a bark or a snarl, but a long, high-pitched, ululating howl. It was a sound of profound distress, of primal warning, a lament that seemed to echo the storm's own mournful shriek. It was a sound that had nothing to do with the men at the door. It was directed at the very foundation beneath their feet. Liam froze. He knew that sound. Julian had described it in the final coded journal. When the stone sighs, the dog will sing its sorrow. It was a trained alert, a signal that the storm's immense pressure and the violent wave impacts were causing dangerous vibrations within the granite structure of the ledge itself. The house was the most vulnerable point. The tunnel and the station below were their only true sanctuary. As if to punctuate the warning, a window on the seaward side of the shack exploded inward, shattered by the force of a wave that had climbed the cliff face. A torrent of salt water and wind blasted into the room, sending papers and old charts flying. There was no more time. "This way, Scout!" Liam yelled. He abandoned the front door, turning instead to the stone hearth. He heaved on the massive slab he and Scout had lifted days before. It tilted upward, revealing the dark, lead-lined cavity. Ignoring the shouts from Evan and his men, Liam dropped into the small space, landing on the floor of the secret passage that led from the house to the top of the tunnel. "Scout, in!" Scout leaped in after him without hesitation. Liam pulled the heavy stone slab back into place, as best he could, just as the front door finally gave way with a crash of splintering wood. He didn't wait to see them enter. He grabbed a flashlight and plunged into the connecting passage, sealing a heavy inner door behind him. Moments later, they emerged into the quiet, still air at the top of the main tunnel. Liam slammed the heavy naval door shut, spun the wheel, and the chaos of the storm was silenced, replaced by the calm, steady hum of the station below. His heart was hammering, but his mind was clear. He and Scout descended into the main chamber. The place was a haven of tranquility, untouched by the tempest raging just 100 feet above. But the massive screen told a different story. The symphony of the deep had become a cacophony. The sonar display was a chaotic mess of screaming color as the storm churned the ocean into a frenzy of acoustic noise. It was a perfect cloak, and hiding within it, Liam saw it instantly. It was a small, dense, dark blue signature, moving slowly but deliberately toward the ledge. A submarine, small, probably a submersible or a mini-sub, using the storm's roar as a perfect shield to mask its approach. These were Evan's investors, arriving for their purchase. The dual threat slammed into him with the force of a physical blow. Above, trapped in a rapidly disintegrating shack, were three hostile but now helpless men. Below, closing in on his position, was a fourth, unknown, and infinitely more dangerous enemy. And the entire structure he was in was under immense physical stress from the storm, just as his grandfather had feared and Scout had warned. He was trapped between the wrath of the Atlantic, the greed of his cousin, and the arrival of a predator from the deep. He stood before the glowing screen, the fate of this incredible legacy, and possibly his own life, resting on his next move. Fleeing was impossible. Fighting on two fronts was suicide. A desperate, incredibly risky idea began to form in his mind. A decision that went against every instinct he had, but was the only tactical option left. He had to consolidate the threat. The decision crystallized in Liam's mind, cold and absolute. He was a guardian of this place, and that meant protecting it from all threats, both inside and out. He looked down at Scout, whose amber eyes were fixed on his, waiting. "Watch them," Liam commanded, his voice a low, steady tone that carried the unmistakable weight of authority. He gestured toward the screen, where the hostile submarine signature pulsed. Then he turned and moved toward the tunnel that led back to the world of chaos. He ascended the passage, the calm hum of the station fading behind him, replaced by the muffled, terrifying roar of the storm. He opened the inner hatch, and the sound grew, a physical pressure against his ears. He took a deep breath and pushed open the heavy stone slab into the maelstrom of the disintegrating shack. The scene inside was one of pure chaos. Evan, Finn, and Rook were huddled against the far wall, their faces pale with terror in the flickering gloom. The roof was groaning under the assault of the waves, and water poured through a dozen new holes. The front door was gone, offering a terrifying view of a black, churning sea. They looked like cornered, desperate animals. "Evan!" Liam's voice cut through the roar of the wind. The three men spun around, their eyes wide with shock at his sudden reappearance from the floor. "The house is breaking apart," Liam stated, not as a warning, but as a fact. "You have 5 minutes, maybe less, before this entire structure is swept into the ocean. You have one chance to live. Follow me, now." "Follow you where?" Evan shrieked, his voice cracking. "To the only place on this rock that's going to exist in 10 minutes, Liam replied, his gaze hard and unforgiving. "You will come with me. You will not speak. You will not touch anything, and you will do exactly as I say. That is the deal. The alternative is you stay here and drown. Your choice." There was no negotiation. There was only survival. Rook, the big man, was the first to move, scrambling toward the opening by the hearth. Finn followed a second later. Evan, his face a mask of disbelief and terror, hesitated for a heartbeat before stumbling after them. One by one, they dropped into the passage. Liam followed last, pulling the heavy stone slab back into place just as a colossal wave struck the house with the force of a battering ram. The sound of splintering timbers, a final, violent punctuation mark. He led them down into the silent, humming sanctuary of the station. They stared at the incredible sight, their wet clothes dripping onto the immaculate metal floor, their faces a mixture of awe and profound fear. Evan's jaw hung open as he looked from the server banks to the massive, glowing screen. The treasure he had imagined was so much more complex and terrifying than he had ever conceived. Scout stood near the base of the stairs, a silent, gray and white sentinel, his presence a clear and potent warning against any sudden moves. Liam ignored them. He walked to a secondary console, a communications array that had been dormant. His fingers flew across the keyboard, his training kicking in. He composed a short, encrypted burst transmission using an old naval protocol, routing it through a secure channel his grandfather had built. It contained their coordinates, a severe weather alert for a Category 4 nor'easter, HEA, and a single coded phrase, "Hostile submersible, Class Sierra, on approach. Vulture's nest is compromised. Request immediate assistance. Vulture's nest." Julian's final, bitter joke. He sent the message. There was no confirmation, no reply. There was only hope that someone, somewhere, was still listening. The hours that followed were the longest of Liam's life. Trapped in the heart of the stone, they were 5 souls adrift in a sea of fury. The only evidence of the storm was the violent, chaotic display on the sonar screen and a deep, bone-jarring vibration that pulsed through the granite. Above them, the shack was torn from its foundation and swallowed by the sea. The submarine held its position, a patient predator waiting for the chaos to subside. Evan and his men huddled on the floor, stripped of their bravado, reduced to shivering, silent figures. Evan would occasionally steal a glance at Liam, his expression no longer greedy, but filled with a dawning, sickening understanding of the magnitude of his crime. Then, as dawn approached, the vibrations began to lessen. The storm was breaking. On the screen, the acoustic chaos started to calm. The dark blue signature of the submarine began to move again, making its final, slow approach to the ledge. But then, new signals appeared. 2 fast-moving signatures of brilliant gold, converging on the submarine's position, Coast Guard cutters. The silent drama played out on the screen. The submarine abruptly changed course, attempting to flee. The cutters were faster. They bracketed the sub, and the blue signature slowed, then stopped. It was over. 2 hours later, under a clean, rain-washed sky, the heavy granite door of the station slid open. Liam, Evan, Finn, and Rook emerged, blinking in the bright sunlight. The top of the ledge was a scene of utter devastation. Nothing remained of the house but a few splintered planks wedged between the rocks. A Coast Guard cutter was anchored in the cove, and armed sailors were waiting. Evan and his men were taken into custody without a word, their faces etched with defeat. Another vessel arrived shortly after, a sleek gray naval transport. A single man disembarked and climbed the ledge. He was older, in his late 60s, with a face that was both kind and authoritative, wearing the crisp uniform of a Navy admiral. He walked straight to Liam, his eyes taking in the scene. "Liam Croft?" he asked, his voice calm. "I am Admiral Hayes. Your grandfather and I served together on the SOSUS project a long time ago. I was the one who got your message. Vulture's Nest. Only Julian would have called it that." Hayes looked at the entrance to the station, a look of profound respect on his face. "We always wondered what he was building out here. We knew it was brilliant, but we never knew it was this." He turned back to Liam. "The technology in there is unique, irreplaceable. Julian's design is a generation ahead of its time. Even now, it cannot be abandoned, but it's too sensitive to be run by just anyone." He paused, his gaze meeting Liam's. "Your grandfather left this place to you for a reason. He believed you were the only one who understood the watch. It seems he was right. We would like to make it official. We are prepared to offer you a special civilian contract with naval intelligence. You would be the sole guardian and operator of this station. Your mission would be to continue his work, to listen, to protect." Liam looked out at the horizon, at the endless blue expanse of the Atlantic. He felt Scout press against his leg, a warm, solid anchor in this new reality. The loneliness, the ghosts, the feeling of being an outcast had vanished, washed away by the storm. He had found his purpose, not in some distant, war-torn land, but here, on this worthless piece of rock. "The watch is now yours," his grandfather had written. "Yes, sir," Liam said to the Admiral, his voice clear and steady. "I accept." Months later, a small, reinforced observation post stood where the shack had been, built to withstand any storm. Liam and Scout stood on the edge of the cliff, the afternoon sun warming their faces. They were no longer exiles, no longer ghosts, haunted by the past. They were sentinels. They were home, and their silent watch had just begun. Sometimes the greatest inheritance is not a fortune, but a purpose, revealed to us by the unwavering loyalty of a friend who asks for nothing in return. The bond between a veteran and their dog is a silent promise, a quiet understanding that they will always have each other's six, no matter the storm. If the story of Liam and Scout's silent watch touched your heart, we would be honored if you would share your thoughts in the comments below. Please consider subscribing to hear more tales of courage and companionship, and be sure to click on our newest story, waiting for you right now on the screen.